In order for the stomach to work, it needs to have oxygen to make the cells work so they can respire, create energy so they can carry out their function. And it also needs to have venous drainage. So we're going to look at the vasculature of the stomach. And importantly, you just need to remember again the lesser curvature and the greater curvature running around the right and the left borders of the stomach. So we can see that if we concentrate on the lesser curvature, we have two what are known as gastric blood vessels. The left and the right gastric blood vessels. These come either directly or indirectly from an important blood vessel known as the celiac trunk. And we'll cover this in later lectures where we look holistically at all of the blood vessels at once because it makes more sense that way. But individually, running along the lesser curvature, we find we have the left gastric artery and we find we have the right gastric artery. And these arteries will form a complete circuit along this lesser curvature, the two gastric arteries. We can then see with this greater curvature, we have two more blood vessels. We have the left gastroamental and the right gastroamental. And these are going to be coming in this direction and this direction, right and left gastroamental arteries. And again, these will join to form a circuit around this greater curvature. So how can you remember your greater curvature and your lesser curvature vasculature? Well, gastric is a short word gastric for the lesser curvature, the small of the two curvatures. Gastroamental is a longer word, and that runs around the longer, greater curvature. You can also see we have some short gastric blood vessels that supply the fundus, and these come off the splenic artery, which we'll see later on. The venous drainage mirrors the arterial supply. So if you're happy with the arterial supply, then just convert the word artery to vein, and you have gastric veins and you have gastroamental veins. These pass back to the liver via what's known as the portal system. And again, we'll cover that in more detail. So this is the vasculature of the stomach. We also need to look at how the stomach's activity is controlled. And to do that, we look at the nerve supply. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the autonomic nervous system. This is part of the nervous system that we're not consciously in control of, not like the somatic nervous system, which controls the skeletal muscle that allows me to contract biceps. The autonomic nervous system is ticking over all of the time. And we can see here in purple and in green, we have two different parts of it. We have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Now, for the stomach, its activity is controlled by the autonomic innervation, and increases of its activity are controlled via the parasympathetic nervous system. This increases activity. This will increase the rate of peristalsis, increase the production of acid, the release of pepsinogen. And it's controlled via the main parasympathetic nerve of the body, the vagus nerve. This enters into the abdomen. The vagus nerve starts high up in the neck at the base of the brain from a region called the medulla, and it passes down the thorax, enters the abdomen via the esophageal hiatus, and then it spreads over the surface of the stomach. It also gives branches to what's known as the celiac plexus, and we'll cover that in a later class because that controls other parts of the abdominal viscera. So this vagus nerve controls the activity of the stomach, and it really increases the activity. Once you've had dinner, you go and sit down in the lounge and do any kind of activity. The digestion of the food is controlled by the parasympathetic via the vagus nerve. If you want the activity to go down, so if you're doing activities that don't really require your stomach to work that heavy, then that's why the sympathetic division. Okay, the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system dampens down the activity of the stomach. And this is via a nerve called the greater splanchnic nerve. And we'll look at splanchnic nerves again in greater detail when we cover the nerve supply, and which we can see here. The autonomic nerves are going to be covered in more detail in lecture 20. So don't worry too much right now if you're not quite fully comfortable with these. We will go over it in greater detail in the last lecture of this abdominopelvic series.